Okay, so welcome back to the plenary, and we're going to start now with a plenary of researchers. And the reason for coming together is to share outcomes that have been discussed. And I just would like to speak from my general impression that I've had, which were like the three strong features of these mixed group opportunities that we had. And I would say that firstly, of course, the thorough discussions that we had on the research questions and on the methodology and about worries and concerns have been a really strong moment that we were able to come together and share this. So content-wise, this was short, though very precise, and that we had the opportunities to hand in our texts and prepare 10 minutes, and also our methodological summaries was, I think, for the purpose of these groups that we built, a very good preparation. Secondly, this joint element of NAFOL students and EDiTE students was extremely valuable in terms of exchange, of getting to know our Norwegian colleagues or the EDiTE colleagues on a personal and professional level. And the third feature is the valuable feedback of the group facilitators, valuable feedback, and on the other hand also flexibility that we especially enjoyed in our group, where we had kind of emotional wish to speak about what had been happening in the sessions before yesterday, and we were allowed to open up our small little plenary in our mixed session to discuss that. So the group facilitators from the NAFOL student group and our EDiTE supervisors. And I would like to invite the research speakers of the 8 groups that we have formed. And please join me here in front of the plenary to dive into some retrospective reflections of what has happened in these 3 sessions that we entered. As you wish. Yeah. There should be 8 groups. Okay. Since I know that our group likes to talk, I would like to say that maybe you can give like a 2 to 3 minute reflection, and I would also like to open this up to other comments who would maybe like to join the debate that goes on here. You can also, of course, always comment on each other and make it maybe rather of flexible and kind of creative outcome presentation. So we could start chronologically with group 1, if that's in your interest. That is the group that was facilitated by Kathy Schultz. Who was that?
Okay, thank you very much. We actually divided what we learned in these days in 3 groups. One, it was about the organization. The second part is what did we learn in our specific group, and the third part is the challenges. What do we learn with this methodology, mixed groups methodology, is that allowed us to get to know each other. Actually, having a persistent group and seeing each other in 2 days and 3 different sessions, it was very good. It also allowed us to talk freely in a structured way, because since we read each other's methodologies, we have reflections on them, and we had also the chance to give and receive feedback. Also, it allowed us to work on general and specific topics, and we are very, very grateful for it. The second part is what did we learn, what did we talk about it in our group. The first topic, it was bringing our own subjectivity, and Kathy actually told us that there is a part in some thesis called Write the Story of My Question. So we can narrate how we get to land in our specific research questions. So that's very, very interesting. Also, we talk about how do we position ourselves within our research. As we all know, we are the lenses in which this thesis is written. So we have also to position ourselves as researchers and as judges of what is in there and not. And it reflect about it and reflect our own biases is very important, and avoid them as well. Also, we talk about the different contexts in which our theses are being developed. We learned something very important also about being more detailed in our methodology and say how did we get from A to B. So that was a very important topic. Next one was how to manage all our methods together. Some of us are using more than one method, and how to make the triangulation and how to make them work together. Also, we had a kind of a snowball of ideas and methods. We gave ideas to each other on how we can use different methods when we had doubts and to make our thesis better. And a very important thought from Kathy was everything we write is a draft. And finally, the challenges we faced. First was the deadlines. That's a big challenge for all of us. Also, the lack of communication between institutions, supervisors, and administratives is very important, and also the bureaucracy within universities. So that's what we talk about.
Thank you very much. I think it's Elizabeth. Is that true? Okay, so group number 2.
Thank you. It's on, yeah. Thank you for the opportunity for the group work. Like you, it was very, very interesting to be in these groups, a very valuable part of the seminar. In our group, we talked, for example, about finding the right vocabulary for talking about empirical findings, being true to the empirical data, how perhaps our participants and subjects are speaking, the language and the language of understanding that they use, and being true to that, yet finding an academic language on another level to talk about it. And I think that this was very important, and there are ethical implications in that question as well. We also talked about the problem of transparency. If you are a researcher on your own, maybe you have empirical data in a language that you know, but you do not have colleagues who know. There can be different problems with that, but how important is it to have a second or a third reader to ensure an external reader to code or to do a sample of coding, as opposed to making your data and your thesis so transparent with examples from the data. Where is the limit for validation in a way there? We also talked about the ethical implications of preserving anonymity of vulnerable communities, and at what point the stop level is there. You have a contract with your participants, about how you are going to use the data, but there is always a limit that you have to decide yourself of how transparent that is going to be. How important is the traceability in those contexts? Then we talked about the challenges and the risks in our conversation this afternoon. And we looked at basically two fields of tension. The one is the problem of the accountability we have to be finished versus quality. And we talked about the pressures of actually managing in the time limit that we have, or that we feel that we are pressured to keep to, on actually being able to think through and to make a work of quality, and how the relationship is between this and what our EDiTE or our NAFOL or our host institution or our supervisors, who all are accountable for our work, how they approach this, and how much support maybe PhD students get from their supervisors and their institutions regarding this. Some are pragmatic, let's just get this through. For others, it really is a case of, this is the magnum opus. This is something that Natalia talked about yesterday. So there is a big tension here about in what way should this be a work of quality, how pragmatic can we be? And finally, we talked about post-doctoral students, or at least what happens and how are we prepared for the aftermath. One of our group talked about getting up to the top of the mountain, but how dangerous it is coming down again as well. Getting back safely to a future, whether it's in academia or it's in another type of work. And when we know that there is this overproduction of research and so on, what the possibilities are for our research informing policy, and in what ways maybe we have a future outside academia in which this can be used. So those were some of the, we found these very, very interesting questions too, and we have no answers. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much. To keep us on track, please stick to a 5-minute limit. Could you, Malte, please take the microphone? It's on group 3.
I'm group 3, okay. Yes, hello, my name is Malte. Nice to see you all. I'm representing the group which consisted of Josefine, Agnieszka, Vivian, Ezra, and was marvelously led by Erika Kopp. Erika did a marvelous job, as we were able to have fruitful and thought-provoking discussions. And I guess these were helpful for everybody involved. More precisely and more in detail, we were focusing on 2 main points, which were also, I think, marvelous that we could do this actually. So the one thing which we had to discuss actually, because this was kind of up in the air, and sometimes you have to respond instantly to the things which emerge from something which just happened, was that we discussed, we were able to discuss, and Erika gave space and time for this, the response, or let's say the comment from somebody from the audience yesterday, about success and excellence. You remember that there was a comment which received a lot of applause, and this created some resonance which we wanted to address, and we were able to address this in the workshop. Thank you, Erika, again. The second focus point from us was about deepening in the methodological discussions. And I think we had a great and inspirational mixture of researchers who gave very interesting and also very detailed background information about how they actually do their research. So for us, this was very important, as we realized that vivid examples of actually research and practice are very much more helpful than when you read a book about what you should do when you facilitate a specific kind of research. So these kind of subgroups were very helpful for us, at least in our workshop. I don't want to go too much into detail, but I asked, of course, the participants themselves what they want me to put forward. As you can imagine, like in every group, we had in the first place huge discussions about who will represent the group, because everybody wants to represent the group, but we decided that I will have to do it, and I'm not only honored, but I enjoy it. So, so what we did say is that reflecting, for example, there was one specific comment. The reflecting on the document analysis method was very helpful. This was raised by Vivian, I guess. This issue. We discovered, in general, the complexities of several methodological approaches, and in a way, we were able to, what I said before, to really understand more from the practical, the research practice, what it means to do research, and we learned also from others about how they facilitate, for example, case studies. We had, for example, a discussion about comparative educational research, what at least the EDiTE people almost do, like, exclusively, but there was also the discussion about, can you do non-comparative educational research? And these kind of, so we had a journey on different layers and different areas, and all I can say for now is that I think the whole group thanks Erika Kopp for facilitating this workshop in that marvelous way. Thank you.
Okay, group 4 is represented by Shaima.
So our discussion was also structured into 3 sections. We discussed methodology in the first meeting we had yesterday, and then we spoke about the aims and problems in the second session, and we got stuck on the aims, and that was, I think, the most challenging session we had. It was very fruitful. And today we spoke about the urgent issues, and the main issues that came up were the issue of trustworthiness, coherence, the challenge of doing comparative studies in transnational context, and clarity. And we discussed some tips on how to tackle these issues. We also reflected on these issues, such as what makes something scientific, and that wasn't planned, but that was a very interesting discussion. And then we also spoke about ethical consideration and how to best protect the participant without losing, of course, without impacting the power of data that we have. And then we also reflected on the issue of subjectivity and objectivity, and we discussed how far we can go with this. We agree that human rights can be the limit, but again, this is also debatable and tricky. So we had an interesting discussion about that, and we left it without answers. But again, we also reflected on our roles as educators in that specific issue. And then we spoke about positionality. And we actually, the EDiTE students, we found out about something called research diaries, which we can use as a source of data. And we were talking about how we felt when we collected data, when we interviewed several participants. And we wanted so much to include this in the thesis, but we didn't know where. And so we got some tips from the NAFOL people that we could use this as a source from the research diaries. So, and then I want to talk about the impact. So from the EDiTE perspective, we thought this was a very useful session. We got 3 supervisors because we have our supervisors, Elena, and 2 PhD students who are done with their PhDs and they're ready to be supervisors. From the NAFOL perspectives, they also thought that it was very useful for them. It challenged them, it made them take a step back, and they also felt that they're not satisfied with their work, and that's very normal. And they, of course, that was, it's also an inspiration for them for future articles, future role as supervisors, and yeah, that's it from our side.
Thank you very much. Halfway through, group 5 is headed by Beata Zwierzyńska. 5 minutes.
Okay. The topics covered, like the themes that we discussed connected with our research were on pedagogical supervision, creativity, teacher empowerment, and expanding a teacher's practice with educational tools using Minecraft, for example. And not only did we discuss the themes, but we concentrated also on the methods used. So there was a variety of methods. It was interesting to see, to hear how people combine them. So, for example, formative interventions, action research, interviews, ethnography, surveys, and document analysis to complement the research. And the general attitude of the participants in the group was just how to empower the participants, the teachers and the students in the collaboration, as collaboration partners or consultants in the research. And we agreed that this is the one of the most important things that we take from both NAFOL and EDiTE programs. The challenges, we discussed the issue of choosing the data, so having it, using it in the time frames that we have, and getting rid of some, even though it hurts, and combining research with theory. There was a feeling on the part of some of the researchers that still some research papers that we read do not reflect or speak like on practitioners, to practitioners, because they just perceive school reality differently. So there is this need to have again and again the practitioners included as partners in the research. Also, we had a nice discussion about differences between case study and comparative study. So one of the researchers still thinking, how to deal with this issue, and but it was very interesting for everyone. Also, I think it was also very valuable that we could talk about, share the information on traditions that we have in our programs, I mean on article-based PhD and monographies. So we asked a number of questions on even technicalities because it was so interesting. And also today we had, for the whole time I feel that we just wanted to spend more time talking and sharing experience, and we just wanted more time. And today, for example, we talked a lot about ethical issues and considerations, and just we feel that at this stage it was very helpful, these meetings, but we wish we had more of those earlier, and just to use more and more opportunities to learn from each other. And our supervisor was just in the background helping us out, and so we really had this forum for our own exchange of information and experience.
Thank you very much. Okay, next group is group 6, and I think that's Andra's turn.
Hello, hi. My name is Andras, and yes, I've been with group number 6. We had a very diverse group, and I think the biggest challenge in the beginning seemed like to overcome the diversity of the group. We were working with early childhood education, junior high school kids, university students, and professors. And it seemed in the beginning that that's going to put something between us. But instead, it seems like we're all education, and we learned so much about each other's projects, and each other's methodology and findings. And it seems like education at all levels have so much more in common than what divides them. We spent a lot of time on methodology, on each other's methodology, on how we are approaching a subject. And I think it was very, very valuable to see so many different sets of eyes on so many different sets of problem statements and aims on so many different pedagogical situations and approaches, and how these very, very different ways of looking at these approaches all coexist and help each other's views broaden and help us to develop our own methodologies and our own researches to be more in-depth and more intensive and nice. So it was very, very valuable. A little bit more time on this today's little group discussions on the worries might have been nice, but at the same time, we don't need to worry. This was the outcome that it's gonna be okay.
Thank you very much. Second to last, group 7, represented by Dev.
Thank you, Josefine. Yes, I represent Group 7, and Group 7 has been very much pragmatic today, and reflecting yesterday, we also had great opportunity to be mentored by Kari, her lifelong experiences on the research, and so we had a chance to discuss the research problems and research questions, and and we got a feedback from her. And apart from that, we also reflected on the methodologies that we were using, and then we had some interpersonal sharing of our methodologies, and that was also very fruitful. Like, for example, if I have to say, one of our colleagues from NAFOL, I guess, yeah, I forgot his name. Einstein. Yeah. Einstein has been using the multimodal. It is like Andreas Lund's model, I guess, multimodal type of methodology, which was very much inspiring for me. And then we also learned like how to triangulate. For example, I'm doing qualitative methodology, and within the qualitative methodology, we need to triangulate different methods of data, etc., etc. So that was very fruitful, and continued with that today. We became more pragmatic in the sense that we focused, as we are at the 11th hour of our PhD, and the deadline is knocking our door. So we focused on how to tackle with the fears now we have in order to complete the PhD successfully. And on that, we talked about like some barriers might be there. For example, the institutional let's say, meeting the requirements of two institutions together. And that is one of the obstacles that we might be facing, or we have the fear of. At the same time, the lack of communication between the two institutions or some bureaucracies, and these are also some, let's say, knocking us with a fear. So, and at the same time, the other fear with us is like how to assure the quality of the dissertation, because we have been working for 3 years, and now it is time to produce the quality, and that was really another fear. And connected with this is like somebody told previously. For example, we have the empirical finding, and then how to communicate that in the right word or right diction, and that's what our fear is. And yes, not least like how to balance the family and the work life, and then meet the deadline. That's also the problem that we're facing, or we expressed, or let's say reality takes over, that Kari has written here. And now, despite all these problems, now this is the time to give priority to the PhD, and that's why we came up with some idea like we may have to sacrifice our family life or the convenience and all that, and then focus on PhD and write and come with the finding we have. And yes, and so PhD the first priority, and next year we can have a holiday. And regarding writing quality, like how can we make the blocks of the writing blocks? We came up with this idea, like forming the writing blocks, and it's like learning the academic language with a setup and the right meeting. Sort of, this was a sort of a scheme that surfaced over there, and not the least, it is next job. Is the question mark. I don't know what this is actually. It was Helena, I guess. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for being so disciplined. And the final speaker is Vasilis.
Okay, well, most of the colleagues before me expressed similar experiences shared by my group, so I will try to be short and we can go on with the discussion. So in my group, members were Wanderson, Lillian, Kinley, and myself, and moderator was Luis Tinoca from the University of Lisbon. And generally the feeling was that these meetings are quite useful because you can actually argue for your own research, and this is kind of self-reflective process that is very useful, very important, and apparently NAFOL is using this structure in many of your conferences, and I think EDiTE also can learn, because we all felt very positive to argue for our own research, but also learn from the feedback of other colleagues who listen to our issues, and also receive feedback from a senior researcher. And the first part of our discussions was related to present objectives. And well, it was interesting to learn about different projects and to see how rich research in the field of teacher education can be. And we talked about assessment, about motor skills in early childhood education, about the curricula of mathematics, about teacher education policies. And I think each one of us was motivated about each other's topic and gave good input to the objectives and aims of the different studies, and also helped us kind of clarify our thinking by arguing and by expressing these objectives and aims. Then the most crucial session, I think it was common, and the most vivid session was this methodological part, where we saw also that things were not clear. So researchers in our group were kind of in different stages also. And well, this was interesting to see. And Luis helped us also to think methodologically and kind of structure our thinking. Okay, that we talk about ontology, we talk about research design, about data collection analysis, And then trustworthiness criteria, we stayed a lot to this issue of triangulation to validate our research findings, but also was a big discussion about research design. And sometimes it seems, okay, grounded theory, case studies, phenomenology, but could somehow be intertwined. Sometimes it's not clear, is this grounded theory or not, or case studies? Then people get to hear so many views about different people, but I think people in our group have good argumentation about the designs they get to choose for their research. But for me, it also indicates something, because at this point of our research, we should strongly be more clear about those things. And since time is kind of running out, it was very helpful to have this discussion once again. And yeah, then the last session was about challenges, where we raised several issues. Especially EDiTE researchers have this feeling about time pressure, and also issues we talked about supervisions. There were worries, are my research questions actually going to be answered? And then Louis gave the nice thing that, well, actually a thesis at the end of the day should raise more questions than it can answer. And we raised issues about insecurities, and we saw that we are not alone in this process. And yeah, more or less, these were the comments.
Thank you very much. I think from your testimonies and your presentations, it has become clear that within the shortest amount of time, we have been actually able to form circles of trust, and that we were able to become critical friends to one another, which is, I think, crucial in a genuine exchange and in the search for guidance and clarification for our most pressing issues at the moment. And thank you very much for giving us this opportunity of having especially an extended session of methodology, which we all need to have a really clear and good understanding of. So thank you very much for coming up here, sweating together, and sharing our results.
Thank you.
And as you know by now, I'm one of the NAFOL students from Norway. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Kathy Schultz from the University of Colorado Boulder. We already know her from Lillian's very nice presentation this morning. But I'd like to add that I am one of the lucky students who got to be in her group during the group sessions. She was monitoring 5 of the EDiTE and NAFOL students. And I have to say, I only met her yesterday, but we've had 3 sessions together in the group work. And I have to say that she is really an example to follow in academia, sharing her brilliant ideas, taking all the students' work very seriously, giving direct advice to our personal work. And I think that thanks to her, our group work was really, really good, and it took all of us forward in our hard job with our thesis. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to your talk on current trends in doctoral studies in the US. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I said this to the group, but I know that I learned as much from the group as they learned from me. So thank you so much, Anameta. Good afternoon. I hope everybody isn't too hot and can stay awake through this. I have the unenviable task of talking about doctoral education in the US in half an hour. It's a huge topic, and I won't do it justice. But I just want to sort of talk about a couple trends and ideas that I hope will be provocative, will resonate with things that you already know, and will move our conversation forward. One of the nice things is that many of the topics that I plan to talk about are ones that have already been raised in this our very short time together so far. And so I think that's a very good sign. It means that we're already starting to talk about many of the kinds of things that that are important. So just to give you a quick overview of what I'll do, I'll start just by very quickly talking a little bit about doctoral education in general in the US, since that was the topic. And then I'll specifically talk about doctoral education in the field of education and teacher education specifically, with a couple different examples. So let's go. In the past, I want to start with the past. In the United States, following World War II, there was something called the GI Bill, which gave money to veterans coming home from World War II, coming back to the US from World War II, to go back to the university. And that meant that there was this huge increase in numbers of students in our universities. And of course, a huge increase in numbers in students in the university meant that there is a great need for professors in the university. So just in that first generation after World War II in the United States, there were many, many jobs for professors, and professors could choose where they wanted to live, they could choose the kind of work that they wanted, and it was a time like no other. But I think what happened in the US, and I wonder if this happened in Europe as well, is that it gave people the idea that that's what happens with doctoral education. And it also, I think in many ways, gave us an oversupply of people with doctorates. And the picture on the left shows the idea that there's this great sort of exuberance after World War II in the United States, and also great poverty at the same time. And I think that that tension exists in education as well. So in the present, I just sort of pulled some current headlines. There's a trend in the US, as we've heard, there is in Europe, of there being an oversupply of students graduating with their doctorates without enough jobs. And in general, the number here, which is actually interestingly the same one that I've heard other people repeat in Europe, is only about 40% of people graduating with a doctorate in any subject go into university jobs. And that present situation, I think, is something that's very important for universities to look at. There are a couple other trends, though, in the United States that I think are notable. One is that in the United States, there's both public and private universities. And public universities are experiencing a time of underfunding. So I teach, as you heard, at the University of Colorado, which used to be primarily funded by states. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about the United States is that every state is different. So we're a country made up of many different policies, both at the K-12 level, but also in higher education. So in Colorado, I'm at what's called the flagship University of Colorado, and our funding from our state is 7% of our budget. So, and our university is talking about what to do when it becomes zero. So despite the fact that the funding is only 7%, the state has a lot to say about what we do. Not as much as your countries do. So there is not as much sort of oversight in universities as I think sometimes there is in your national sort of regulations. But for those of us in the United States, it seems like there's more and more control from the top and less money or responsibility for that. Another trend in the United States is that there is a trend towards entrepreneurship. That means universities are figuring out ways to make money in other ways in addition to their students. So costs are going up in universities, funding is going down. It's hard to keep charging students more and more money. And so universities are looking for other ways to make money. And that sometimes is in real tension with academics and with sort of the job of professoriate. professors. So there's pressure to sort of start programs that earn money, to publish textbooks that earn money, and those kinds of things. Sometimes the presidents of universities, so whatever the head of the university is, don't come from academia, they come from business. So for instance, the president of the 4 universities in Colorado was never a professor. And that's, he's very good at raising money, but it raises questions. And one result that people talk about a lot is that the faculty more and more feel as though they're having less and less say over what happens at the university. And that is of great concern. The other trend, which has really caught a lot of attention, and it all has to do with money, it seems like everything boils down to money and time, probably, but is that instead of tenure track positions, there are more and more what are called non-tenure track position or adjunct positions. So these are positions where people don't get paid nearly as much money, and there's no, well, depending on the university, there's little or no job security. And at the University of Colorado, in my department, we primarily have tenure track faculty, but in some departments, in some schools, as many as 80% of the faculty is non-tenure track. And what's very common, though it's not common in my university, is that teacher education is taught primarily by non-tenure track faculty. Now, sometimes that makes sense because non-tenure track faculty often are teachers who are deciding to take on teaching in teacher education, and they often have a lot of knowledge, as we can imagine, but they also don't have the same kind of long-term investment. And so it's complicated, and it's brought a lot of complications. So that's where we are in the present, is that universities in general are producing a lot of people, many of which, the majority of which will not get academic jobs. So the future, what do we think about the future? I think in the future, universities are going to have to think more and more about how to prepare people for these non-academic jobs that use scholarly research as an asset. So it's not that we want to give up on people and say it's lesser to go into non-academic jobs. And I think that we need to change our language in universities so that we accept this reality that universities can prepare scholars that are great assets to many different fields. And we need to really think very hard about what that means. One word for that is called alt-ac, and that's sort of this movement in the United States to sort of take very seriously this alternative routes to academia, which I think is really quite important and quite important for us to take seriously. But what that means is that we need to prepare our students for those other careers. And I think that in many, many fields, education included, and I'll talk more about this when I talk about education, we're not doing a very good job of thinking about that. One group of people at our universities that is doing a better job at thinking about this are the students themselves. And so in many universities, you see students organizing themselves to prepare themselves for their future. So in my university, for instance, in my school of education, a group of students came to me as dean and said, we're really interested in public scholarship, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by public scholarship, and we want to organize a set of seminars and a set of experiences and actually a certificate in public scholarship. And so students are organizing themselves in terms of certificates or programs of study. Students are also organizing themselves to have conferences, and in many universities there are student-led conferences that prepare themselves not only for academia, as our students have been doing here, but also for, again, scholarly work outside of academia, and through publishing journals. So again, our students at CU Boulder at my campus just started an online journal, or they're about to start this fall, keep your eyes out, on public scholarship. But that's completely student initiated and then supported, of course, by the faculty, including me as dean. So I think that there is a lot for us to think about. The other topic in universities is what is going to be the role of online education. And people are thinking that that a residence in a university is only going to be part of an education, and we need to think really creatively about what online education is. I think that the number is about 40% of students take at least one course online in the United States, and it's much higher than that in some particular universities and different fields. And so, that's another area that people are preparing themselves for and thinking about what can we and can't we do about online, and that's, something we can talk about more. So that's the universities in general. Let me talk a little bit about the education doctorate. So one of the things that we heard yesterday, Ezra brought this up, is that in the United States there are two kinds of doctorates in education. There's the EDD and the PhD. And the PhD is a traditional doctorate in education. The EDD is a doctorate, so the PhD is doctorate in philosophy, which is what probably all of you are getting and which is very traditional. But many universities have also a doctorate in education or an EDD, and that's considered to be more of a practice-based doctorate. Some universities just have EDDs, so for years, Harvard and Stanford, two of the most prestigious universities in the United States, just had EDDs. Other universities, like the University of Pennsylvania, where I taught for many years, had both a PhD and EDD. I actually was a student at Penn, and I went and got my doctorate thinking I wanted to be an elementary school principal, and then fell in love with teacher education and decided to be a professor, and decided they were very much the same thing. But I remember standing in the sort of student lounge thinking, do I want a PhD or do I want an EDD? And it was just sort of a box to check. Now there's a hierarchy between a PhD and EDD, and PhDs are generally fully funded when schools have both, and EDDs aren't as completely funded. So it's an interesting hierarchy that sort of mimics some of the tensions we talked about this morning in terms of respecting teacher education and practice-based education. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the variations in the United States, and one is there's a range of formats for the way courses are organized, and so most programs have sort of a traditional set of courses. So at the University of Colorado Boulder, students, if they don't come in with a master's degree, tend to take 3 years of classes. And those include 2 courses in quantitative research, 2 courses in qualitative research, and then advanced courses in both of those. So there's a very heavy emphasis in our particular university, in our particular school of education, on research methodology. But the students take courses, but at the same time that they take courses, I mean, all of you, it sounds like, have had opportunities to work while you've been in school. I know the EDiTE students have, researchers have. What we try to do is give our researchers a range of experiences, and so we try to give them, and I'm not saying we always succeed, opportunities to be on research projects, opportunities to do their own research. We try to give them opportunities to teach, and we try to give them opportunities to do professional development. So we try to give them, as part of their graduate education over these 3 years, these kinds of experience to pay for their doctorate. So another way of doing coursework, though, that some universities are experimenting with is using more of an apprenticeship model, and it's probably closer to a European model where students start on research groups and take courses that they need in order to inform their research. So the focus of their work is in these research groups that they might stay in for the 3 years that they're doing this initial part of their doctoral work, or they might be in 3 different projects. So that apprenticeship format is slightly different. As we've seen, we also have a range of formats for dissertation. It's still most common in education to have what people have been calling the monograph, or sort of the typical dissertation. But we also borrowed, really in the United States, from economics with the 3-paper dissertation that some people have been doing here, especially in NAFOL, it seems like. But I also think I heard somebody talk about multimodal methods, and we have multimodal dissertations now. So I had one dissertation that I supervised where part of the dissertation was also, in the old days, it was a CD. We don't have those really anymore, but it was, it was not only text, but it included pictures and videos as part of the presentation of the dissertation. So people are working on different kinds of formats for the dissertations. We have the same varied methodologies as we've seen represented in all of your projects. But the length of time, I think, is worth noting. I would say that in education, a typical length of time from start to finish is 4 to 6 years. And it's not uncommon for it to be 6 years. So I think that there's certainly programs that are shorter, but there's no mandate from a state or from a national government saying that doctoral programs have to be a certain time. I know at the University of Colorado, again, we fund students fully for 4 years, thinking it will take at least 4 years, but then give them opportunities to work after that if it takes longer, which it often does. And I thought I'd just give you quickly an example of my timeline, which actually was quick when I did it, and you'll see it was interrupted too. So I was a classroom teacher and had my first child in June at the end of the school year, and started my doctoral work in September with a few-month-old child. And then at the end of 2 years of courses, which is the number of years of courses I took in my program, I tried to time it right, wasn't quite perfect, but had my second child at the end of my courses, and started in my 3rd year with my comps and my data collection in a classroom, and I did a 1-year ethnography. In the middle of that year, I became a principal, which I was job sharing a principal job, and finished collecting my dissertation, did my analysis in the summer when things were quiet at the school, spent the next year being a principal and writing, but mostly being a principal and having 2 small kids. In my 5th year, I got out of my principal job by moving across the country, graduated in August, and had my 3rd child in September. So I say to my kids that I framed my doctoral work around children. One result is that not a single one of my children wants to be a professor. They saw me working too hard. But then afterwards, I did do a postdoc for 3 years, and that was a very helpful thing for me because I was able to work on a number of projects, but also begin to publish from my dissertation. And I felt like having a postdoc gave me a running start. In terms of when I started as a professor, I already had some things published and some research started. I got, in the United States, the Spencer Foundation is a very good funder, or was especially a very good funder. But I also wanted to say that I was part of a number of different writing groups. So I didn't just write on my own. I found colleagues and to write with. And I realized when I moved from Philadelphia, where I was first a professor for 12 years, to Oakland, that I had been writing once a week for 10 years with the same person. And that was really important. I mean, we would just sit in the same place and write, and then sometimes exchange manuscripts. And she sometimes graded papers. I was a little bit more disciplined and wrote mostly. But I think having writing groups and having colleagues to share writing with as I was publishing things was really important at the beginning. So enough about me. Another kind of thing that I think is really important is that the teacher education programs or educational doctorates are inventing new programs. I mentioned this morning that we're in the University of Colorado, we're really focusing on teacher-educator learning, and those are new programs. And so we're about to start a new program called Teacher Learning Research and Practice. So that's a brand new program that we're starting, and there's a couple of them across the country, but it's really about teacher-educator learning. It's interesting, it's replacing a program that was called Rotate, which is research on teaching and teacher education. And just as we were saying this morning, we don't want to assume that only universities do research on teaching and teacher education, so we really changed that. But there are also, I just thought I'd give you a couple examples of topics. One of the several things that I do is I'm vice president of Division K, which is the Division of Teaching and Teacher Education of the American Education Research Association, a mere 6,000 people in that division. And these are the dissertations from the last 2 years, which I thought would be interesting for you to see sort of what some of the dissertations that won the prizes were. So this past year, the dissertation that Jenny Higgs did was about a tool, a digital tool that was supposed to help teachers understand how to conduct discussions. And so she found out, and I have the name of the tool, I'm forgetting it, but she found out that, so it's called subtext. And she found a couple things that were really quite interesting. One is that the idea, yikes, I just did something wrong. Let's see if I can, I don't know that I can fix it. Now I really didn't fix it, okay. She found out that instead of helping teachers with sort of facilitate student-initiated discussions, teachers used it to facilitate teacher-initiated discussions, which I thought was really quite interesting. The second thing she figured out was that students needed time face-to-face before they were good at using this new tool, and at any rate, it was a very interesting, I guess the third thing to say about it is that it was a mixed method dissertation, that she first sort of looked at this tool from using a survey and then really in-depth interviews and case studies of 2 students and 2 teachers who were using it. The second dissertation was actually done by a teacher who went and got his doctorate as he was continuing to teach. And his doctorate, so this is last year, 2 years ago, winter, not this past year, and he did an action research project where he had instructors from the disciplines work together to teach literacies to pre-service teachers. So he was really concerned about how to teach pre-service teachers who were secondary teachers becoming, say, science teachers or math teachers, include literacy, but instead of just having somebody in literacy teach sort of, sometimes it's called writing across a curriculum, he had the disciplines all work together and sort of collaborate to do it. So what was really interesting in his finding is that it was particularly useful in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, and particularly useful for students of color. The third thing that I thought I'd mention is we hear a lot about, in K-12 schools or pre-K-12 schools, about new students, new populations of immigrants, and how K-12 schools are accommodating those. But in the United States, and I imagine in all of your universities, we also have an increasingly diverse group of students. In the United States, the group of immigrant students that are at most at risk we call undocumented, or there's a group called DACA, D-A-C-A, and they're a group of students who were given the ability to a pathway to citizenship and the ability to get jobs and scholarships for college. Under the Obama administration, in our current administration, that's all being threatened. And so one of the things that we're addressing in our schools is this sort of precariousness that our students are facing and how to support them. So again, we're thinking very seriously about how to prepare our students for their varied futures. And one of the things that we talk a lot about at the University of Colorado is what we call publicly engaged scholarships. And my colleague Kevin Wellner describes it in a really good way. He talks about parallel conversations. And that is, how do you have conversations both with a community of scholars about your finding, and how do you have conversations at the same time with the public? And so how do you translate your findings to the public? So it's not foregoing scholarship for writing a blog. It's not sort of trading one for the other, but thinking about how to have these parallel conversations. The other way that publicly engaged scholarship is talked about is, and I talked about this a little bit this morning, is collaborative community-based research. And so that's one of the ways that universities are reaching out to the communities and engaging in research with the communities. One of the initiatives I brought to Colorado was to really use the money that I was given as a new dean to seed this kind of collaborative research in 3 different communities so that as a university we could have a deeper impact in each of those 3 areas. In research, where we place student teachers, in professional development that we give, and in our community-based work that we do. But one of the things that we'll have to do as we increasingly see publicly engaged scholarship is we're going to have to change the reward structures. So right now, if tenure is rewarded just based on journal articles from certain prestigious journals, then that's not going to work to encourage people to do publicly engaged research. And so we have to really have these conversations at all different levels. And so again, one of the things that we've been able to do in Colorado is rewrite our tenure rules to include publicly engaged research as part of what we count towards tenure. Now, my initiating a discussion among faculty to do it and they're agreeing to do it doesn't mean that they're going to vote for it when they vote on tenure cases. And so it is a cultural shift that we'll really need to do. So that's what I have to say. I think our conversation, our questions will be later.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for a very informative and interesting talk. I'm sure that many of you have questions, but after the second talk, there will be a question and answer session. So just save your questions for that part of the afternoon. Thank you.
So then we'd like to invite our second speaker, who is Júlia Hamsovszky. She's an interpreter and also a second-year PhD student here at ELTE. She's doing her PhD in cognitive linguistics and international communication, focusing on Slavonic languages. She's also a board member in the Hungarian Association of Russian Teachers, as well as in the international affairs in the Association of Hungarian PhD candidates. Part of the working group coordinator in the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. So warm welcome to Júlia Hamsovszky.
First of all, I'd like to say some words to introduce our organization, Eurodoc. So Eurodoc is a European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, registered as a non-profit organization in 2002, based in Brussels. It represents early career researchers on education, research, careers in Europe, advance the quality of doctoral programs and standards of research activity in Europe. Share also information, organize events, join debates, shape policies for research in Europe. Our governance is like we have a general meeting, national associations form highest decision-making body in Eurodoc, administration, administrative board, secretariat, and advisory board. Eurodoc is a key stakeholder, collaborates with and provides input for policy to the European Commission, Council of Europe, and other stakeholders in and beyond Europe. Eurodoc conducts yearly surveys among its national associations. Eurodoc has been involved in major European surveys such as the Doc Career Surveys with the EUA and the recent survey on open science and career development for researchers with the European Commission. We have 32 members and 4 observers in Europe, 23 European members, 2 European Free Trade Associations, and also we have a non-European affiliated member. Our main activities, some words about our main activities, to attend conferences and other events in order to inform people about the situation of doctors and junior researchers in Europe, also to raise awareness to Eurodoc and its members. Activities like by writing statements, articles, policy papers, reports on all topics relating junior researchers and PhDs. Taking also to other stakeholders and the press about these issues. We have several working groups as doctoral training, employment and careers, equality, interdisciplinarity, mobility, open science, policy research, and finance and governance. Our stakeholders are mostly the European Commission, Euroscience, the European University Association, and others. That's some information about status of NAs. So they are mostly non-profit organizations. A membership system and represented groups, as you can see, we have NA membership and represents also. Regular financial support is mostly from membership fees. Our priorities are mostly to policy-making activities and advocacy. This is really interesting that the status of doctoral candidates is mostly students in Europe. So we are students and not employees, and the preferred status for doctoral candidates is to be employees or both. You can see here the net monthly income of doctoral candidates in Europe. So Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, France, Finland, and UK have the most of the monthly income, and you can see the others. And this is our Big Mac index, how many Big Macs can be bought from the net monthly income of PhD candidates. So that's not much in Hungary, but I don't know, I think it's not healthy, so it's good for our diet here. Grants, some infos about grants and social benefits. They have health insurance, pension, public services, and cultural services also. Duration of regular PhD training. It's like almost 5 years. And you can see here the percentage of PhD candidates successfully obtaining the PhD degree. So that's not much. Only in UK they can finish a big amount of PhDs finishes their PhD degree. And you can see that we really need a better quality of doctoral training and more years of funding to finish our PhD degree. Some words about doctoral training. In Eurodoc we have a doctoral training working group. It has resulted by a spontaneous working shop during the Eurodoc AGM 2016. And it's very important for the future career of PhD holders, and unfortunately the recommendations from key documents regarding doctoral training reforms have not been widely implemented across Europe. So the aim to promote good practices of doctoral training. Number of 700,045 doctoral candidates in Europe are undertaking modern doctorates. These degrees fulfill a variety of purposes, knowledge exchange between industry and academia, the development of higher levels, and professional practice and development programs for practitioners of advanced standing. So this doctoral level development also needed for advanced levels of practice within the professions, in applied research, in policy making, in management, and in many other leadership roles in society. As identified, if Europe is serious about its objective to become the most dynamic knowledge society in the world, then strong support of doctoral education is really necessary. So the collaborative involvement of all stakeholders and the sponsoring organization is central to the design of these doctorates. It's necessary to build trust between universities and other sectors. Such trust is, for example, built on formalized but flexible research and research training, collaboration between industry and higher education institutions, like joint research projects and doctorates or similar. The modern doctorate and its pedagogical relationships, as you know, the normal conventional researcher they are experts in their organizational fields, having an expertise that academic supervisors may not have, or indeed may not need to have, as what they bring is expertise in research. And that habitus of critical thinking and reflexive practice. So traditional balance of power teacher, disciples are to meet the purpose of the research as one of transforming practice. So, for example, it's a big problem nowadays. Supervisors may find themselves challenged by candidates who may be older, experienced, and in senior positions within their organization. And I really like these words, the secret garden of academia, because the candidates may feel excluded from the secret garden of academia in their need for an accessible common language and understanding of the power dynamic and the co-creation and exchange of knowledge, knowledge transfer. The most important for the highest levels the highest level of trust, confidence, and rapport as candidates and supervisors engage in learning as the candidate moves from dependence to independence as a research. Professional learning relationships may also be considered to be value-driven, as they may demand openness of mind and heart. Yes, we can hear this expression every day because we become more conscious to the world, to the universe, and you can see the same expressions in the relationship between a PhD student and a supervisor too. Here are some examples for modern doctorates. And the respondents of Eurodoc survey identified that the development of these programs was initiated in general by the academic faculty and occurred within the discipline home itself. The structure of university requires a program to have a home, and that home is usually within school. And yet when asked, many of them identified the very distinct multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity nature of the work. You can see here 20% of disciplinary, 31 professional, the others multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. There are some points of discussion which are very important. Should modern doctorate be aligned to specific university schools? What are the criteria that define whether alignment is necessary or not? And are they modern doctorates co-produced with professions or organizations and academia? And of course, what benefits or opportunities would that bring to us? Why? It's a interesting question. Why and who does a modern doctorate? And this here you can see, yes, the age of doctoral candidates. It's 44% of between 26 and 35 years, and the others are older. How to start doctoral training? These programs are recruiting candidates who are within the workplace or seeking to work with one. As such, the normal recruitment criteria for doctoral work is not so relevant or indicative of potential. All entry producers involved some kind of application process where a form was completed identifying past experience, but also a personal or project statement was required. How to start, how to setting the scene. If a candidate have started a program, the supervisor relationship becomes the main source of engagement in his life. So the importance of this is very high. How this relationship was started and on what basis it was concisely referred. You can see here about the agreement, what was between the students and supervisors. It's almost 50% it's written. It can be a combination of verbal and written agreements. Exists a verbal agreement too. And there are some dictated agreements too, dictated by the supervisors. The elements included were generally operational and dealt with these points: frequency of contract, mode of contact. Preference seems to be face-to-face, but Skype and email are also used increasingly. Occasionally there will be some discussion as to how feedback is given. The supervisory style and skills. You can see postural, directive, deductive, critical friend, teacher, learner, dialogic, and collegiate. The interesting thing that critical friend and dialogic are the dominant themes, and out of all the options available in this question, directive is the least favored in this question. This is in contrast to the style expected of conventional PhD supervision, because their researchers where the public relationships are well described as identified in the literature review. Supervisors are the real need for explicit model of practice that frames the work. They should be clear as to what the purpose of the work is, who is responsible for what task, and in the supervisory team, and how the relationships will work. Yes, being clear, taking part in the supervisory training is really necessary to find a mentor with whom you supervisors discuss the work with the candidates. Being an expert is a particular subject area and method of research, the modern doctorate supervisor, expert in the process of critical engagement, and meta-analytical skills in relation to research methods, activity, and interpretation to creatively support their candidates. Diverse and contextualized research design. Universities, they still have no traditional view that we are being prepared for university careers. And the academic career is not very attractive to young doctoral graduate. The system is hierarchical and poorly paid. That's by comparison to other